Can you tell us briefly about what the Vector Institute does and what is your mission there in particular?
Yeah, no, thank you. So Vector Institute is one of the leading AI institutes globally. We are based out of Toronto, most widely acknowledged and known for the research and the researcher community that is part of Vector. And so they do breakthrough research in AI. At this point, we have around 700 researchers. And so we have Vector faculties and affiliate faculties and their students and postdocs and so on. And so Vector has always been pushing the boundaries in AI research, and they are at the forefront of it.
Is it public-private funded?
It is a public-private funded, yes. So we are a public-private kind of partnership model, and so we do get our funding from both levels of the government, so provincial and federal, and at the same time we have our industry sponsors who sponsor us, right? So
and Vector operates as a nonprofit.
We are a nonprofit. Yes, so it's a non-profit. So it's a very unique kind of structure of operating, right? So I think, so it's a very different and then a unique way of how we bring this whole ecosystem together to leverage this technology for creating like good for Canada and the world.
You've been in the AI industry for years now, but the last few months, the last few weeks have been exceptional for this industry. So what are some of the most interesting things that you've seen lately in the AI space?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me. I'm super happy to be here and having this conversation. I think what has changed most is not really like fundamentally the technology or the research or the applied side of things, but I feel like past few months, what has happened with generative AI is it has been now made accessible in a very easy way of user interactions for masses, right? And then so I think that has changed drastically, right? So this powerful technology is reaching very directly, right? So AI was embedded in a lot of like applications that we use day to day, right? And recommendation systems are essentially everywhere. I search a place on Google Maps, or I open up my Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn or whatever, right? That like AI has been embedded in all of this technology in our daily life. But what happened with ChatGPT and Bard and such is this is the first time that masses have been able to interact directly with this technology. And so I think that has also created there's created more awareness about like what can be done and what are the potentials of using this technology. At the same time, it has also created more thoughtful thinking amongst like non-technologists, right? About, okay, this is such a powerful technology, and what are the risks and challenges along with the opportunities associated with this from a multiple perspective, not just the perspective of a technologist, but also from a perspective of whoever you are, right? And so that is, I think, the big change that we are seeing. It has just become way more accessible and in the forefront of everything.
So if you had to pick, for example, maximum 3 things that have been announced in the last few months, what was most exciting for you personally?
There's a journalist and a researcher. They went on and evaluated this open source generative models of Stable Diffusion. These are like text to image generation models, and they've done a very interesting kind of study on the biases and how these biases are not they're not just reflecting the bias in the data, they're actually amplifying them, right? And so that was like a very powerful piece of investigative journalism, bringing this multidisciplinary lens of, say, journalism and social science into the impacts of this technology was very, for me, very refreshing, but at the same time very impactful in the way it was done.
You were talking about bias in AI and the fact that it reproduces some biases we have in society and sometimes even amplifies these biases. Now, I think probably the vast majority of people would agree that amplifying these biases is not a good idea. And then there is a certain group of people that would say that reproducing these biases is not a good idea. But there is also people like, for example, Elon Musk lately announced he wanted to create Truth GPT, and the fact that having all these filters and trying to eliminate all these biases when they represent a certain truth about how humans see the world, and which might be wrong, by the way. It might be biased, it might be unfair, but the fact that there is censorship on that also is debatable. And I understand both points of view, and I understand the concerns of each side, and they both have their points. So what is, for example, your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I think one, I do feel that the role of any technology, right, like not just AI, right, the role of any technology is to uplift humanity, right? It should have positive impact on us as society and as humans, right? And so I do think that I understand both the point of views, but I do feel that the role of AI again is not to, if we can, we shouldn't amplify things that we know for sure objectively are not good for the society and for human beings and for the world, right? At the same time reflecting, so I'm not, so my specialization is not in the alignment problem that you're talking about, right? And so I would have a very ill-informed view on that. But I do think that aligning systems to human values and societal values, and even collective intelligence, will be the key in how this impacts us as human beings and as part of this larger ecosystem, both for the planet and the people. I don't have the answer, unfortunately, there, right? Because I think this is a very good question, which I'm trying to have conversations with a lot of other people who are actually working in the field of alignment, and I don't, right? So is it important? Yes, but how do we do that? I don't have answers there. I also feel that one thing though is very important, that these systems which are being built predominantly by a select few, right, in terms of the groups, and are being adopted and are going to be used by the masses, as we just talked about, they have to reflect views of the masses and not just the select few who are building the systems. So that much I do think that I agree on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this kind of ties into another question I had for you, which is, if you believe in any of the apocalyptic scenarios that have been circulating lately about AI, what's your take on that?
I'm not sure I would use the word apocalyptic. I do, the way I think of it is, as with almost every technology, there are risks associated with AI, right? And there are both present and near-term risks that we are experiencing. And there is, even if it is, say, small, there's a likelihood of a huge risk or X risk, as researchers or a lot of other people would quantify it, in the future, right? The likelihood scenario of that might be less, but the impact could be very high. And so I do think that we have to focus on both, actually.
Do you consider there is a possibility of actually the AI singularity, AI taking over the world? It is one of the thousands possible paths, but it is a possible path, or do you personally think that's just more like something that gets thrown out to grab public attention, but not really a concrete possibility?
I don't know enough about the specific thing to quantify how likely it is, right? Like when I think of risk, I think of in terms of impact and likelihood. I don't think I have enough of say information to quantify it in that sense. But I do know that there are a lot of unknown unknowns, and there will be more unknown unknowns, right? And so this is where it becomes very tricky. For me personally, I think this is one of those things which is an unknown unknown, right? Like Whereas there are other kind of, say, risk scenarios which are posed. For example, weapons of mass destruction, like using AI, right? I think that is not really an unknown. That is like a known unknown, right? So like that can happen. We just don't know exactly how it will happen. We have certain scenarios in which it can happen. Whereas what, say, AI taking over the world in terms of like, say, Terminator style kind of a thing, like,
Yeah.
I personally don't know enough to quantify it, but I do think even beyond that, there are a lot of unknowns that we should not have a blind spot, right? Like, and just dismiss it, or just put too much emphasis on it, right? Kind of thing. There has to be a balance there.
And what is your view on, so one of the issues that it's brought up, I feel one of the most pressing ones in the short term is the kind of deepfakes topic, right? Where people say, okay, it's funny to see maybe the Pope with the white jacket, and we all realize that was not a true picture, but we all had a laugh. But what when we start to see images that are not real, but people perceive as real, that can influence voting decisions or elections? And so that is one of the nearest risks that I feel has been brought up most often lately, and probably for good reasons. There is also the idea that someone calls you and you hear the voice of, let's say, your son or your dad or someone, a close friend, and it's actually an AI simulating it, asking you to do something that might not benefit you. It usually would be to like get some money, for example. So how are we going to handle that? How are we going to figure out what is true and what is not when AI gets better and better at creating things that look real?
Yeah, so I think that is a real risk, right? I don't want to downplay that, right? That is a real risk. At the same time, again, this is also a very rapidly evolving field, and there are already a lot of tools out there, and there's already a lot of research going on in terms of detecting what is that watermark kind of a thing. So this was like AI generated or not. Are they perfect? No, not yet, right? But I believe like 100% that we will get better and better at it, right? So security in this sense, and then privacy. There's a lot of work going on in privacy research and security research, which will then be adopted, right? You would say why I'm optimistic? Because I'm optimistic because the techniques which are advancing so fast in terms of generation, they have at the same time they also have say similar pace and impact on addressing the risk as well, right? And so I think even if we are maybe not there 100% yet, I do think that field is maturing and evolving very, very fast to address this very specific risk. At the same time, and this is what I mean by governance as well, right? What happens, like for example, there's no legal framework of what happens when something like this is found out, right? Or what are the guardrails on how you can and cannot use this technology? And there are some kind of precedences, but it's not very prescriptive yet, which I hope will become more prescriptive.
So your idea is like part of that problem will be, tell me if I'm understanding correctly what you're saying. Part of that problem will be solved technologically. We will develop technologies that will automate this process. We'll detect if something is generated by an AI more reliably and more easily. And part of that, the part that we will not be able to handle that way, will still be an area of human misbehavior and will be handled through laws and security, the way we've handled other similar things.
Yes, I think you are characterizing it very accurately, right? So there is a lot that we will address through technology. There's a lot which we will also address through governance of people who are building this technology, right? And then there will always be a case to be made of governing this from a law and order perspective.
Right. So like always, I guess, we are at a stage where we want like a one simple answer to a very complex and articulate problem. And the reality is that probably the solution will come from a variety of factors that need to be addressed from different bodies and in different ways.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, this is again, it's a very, this is no longer just a technology question, right? And so we need, in fact, we should have a multidisciplinary solution and frameworks for things like this.
In the past, you, if I'm not mistaken, you worked on AI projects that were related to energy and climate change. So how do you see the AI is contributing to the global efforts to mitigate climate change?
Yeah, so I'll be a little bit more selfish here and tell you a little bit more about like what we are doing in Vector around
Please,
this,
please.
right? And so we had a couple of projects which are now done. And for example, we had a project on forecasting, and so we have built this reference implementations in terms of how you can forecast more accurately what the weather patterns will be in a specialized location. And why is this important for climate change? You will ask, is for multiple reasons, right? So that can help with mitigating risk with how plants grow, for example, in agriculture, right? So agriculture management, it is also a big factor in terms of accelerating adoption of renewable energy. If you can forecast the production of renewable energy better, you can also optimize like when do you charge or discharge your batteries, and how much solar energy will be available on the grid. Such for grid resilience and so on, and all of that is actually connected surprisingly with weather, right?
Do you think that eventually engineers, software engineers, are going to be out of work, or do you feel that there's always going to be a need for a software engineer, and these are just tools that support the work of a software engineer?
I think there is always going to be need for software engineer, right? So so here's the thing. I do feel that software engineering is more than just writing code, right? So if you are focused on, say, okay, I just write code, right? Then maybe like, you need to rethink about that skill set. But software engineering is much more than just writing code, right? It is about efficiencies. It's about design patterns. It's about there's a lot of creativity, right, essentially, that goes into software engineering, and there's a lot of architectural elements to it, right, as you go higher, right? So some of it will be accelerated, right? And so I was talking to, for example, some of the other friends who are more like in startup world, right? And they're saying, okay, we are able to push like product releases much faster now, right? Kind of thing. And so this will augment it. But the need for the software engineering skill and mindset, right? I think it's always going to be there, right? The nature of it is going to change. And these are going to be the tools which help with that, right? And so some of the things which, for example, will also happen is how do you evaluate talent, right? Kind of thing. Like I was talking to like a few of the people I know in tech industry, and a traditional practice is this coding interviews using like well-known platforms, right? Now it has become very easy to answer those questions, right, kind of thing. So that it's now no longer a true evaluation of the skill set of a person.
That leads into like a great question, actually, that something I wanted to ask you about. I mean, we all see, if like you're hiring at Vector Institute, right? Yeah. I suppose that your hiring process has been impacted by the massive use of AI in the last few months, because now people submit like their letters, or they do their coding tests, or in any area, actually. So are we going to a scenario where we will only be able to hire people through in-person interviews where we cut them off from any technology? Or how do we still do it reliably in a remote way or a synchronous way?
Yeah, so I think there are multiple questions there. So has this impacted our hiring? I would say not a lot, right? Yes, it has impacted, like I think, but not a lot in that sense. And the reason is because we are way early in this experimentation funnel, and so we are always placing more emphasis on creativity, idea generation, on ability to learn new things is like very, very important for us, because this field is moving so fast, right? So if you are able to do exact same kind of, say, design questions or pattern questions again and again, which have been like, say, bread and butter of software engineering for a couple of decades now, that is good to know, but that is never been like a big kind of weighing factor for us in hiring someone, right? So we do have coding tests, but then coding test is not the only thing, but it's also not the most important thing that we kind of look at when we make a hiring decision. And so it has affected us a little bit for sure, but not a lot. And so secondly, this is where evaluating for this mindset and evaluating for problem solving becomes way more important, right? And so I don't think we need only in-person interviews, right? But I do feel that if you're, and there might be use cases where you don't need it, but for us, we do need, say, at least in real life interviews, right? So it's not asynchronous like 100%. It cannot be asynchronous 100% for us.
So, and to wrap this up, again, you're a leader in the AI field. What are some of the major trends or innovations that you see coming up, and some that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, so there are a couple. So one, I'm very much excited about foundation models beyond language, right? And so I think we are seeing a lot of brilliant advances in language modeling, but using this generative models and specifically like foundation models in, say, things like materials discovery, things like climate simulations. I think I'm super excited about the potential for that, and we'll start seeing a lot more of it. Like even weather forecasting, right? Like what we did like a year ago in weather forecasting, we could do a lot more now, right? And so what is that beyond language and beyond just creating pictures, for example, is something which I'm very, very optimistic and enthusiastic about what's coming next, in a sense. The other, I'm very much looking forward to very novel applications in multi-modal data. And so our world is not single mode, and we absorb information and process information in multiple modalities. And so a lot of work that is happening in multiple modalities is something which is like very interesting for me. And even like when you look at like use cases in multimodality beyond like what we traditionally hear about, say text to video or text to image, is say we are currently, for example, doing a project on using satellite images for downstream tasks as it relates to environment and climate change impacts. And there's huge multimodality. The satellite data itself is hyperspectral. Then you have modality of IoT sensors which are on ground, and you have modality of actually lab tests. And so multimodality can have multiple meanings, right? And it's not just a language or video or something. It can manifest in different ways. And so I'm very much like enthusiastic about applications in multimodal space. And thirdly, I think this is very maybe not directly kind of related to, say, what I do for my day job, but I think how creative aspect of any kind of profession is going to change and become more amplified because of like AI assisted tools is something we'll see a lot of progress there. At least I feel that way. So I'm very much like enthusiastic about that as well.
That's cool. Yeah, if I understand correctly, the last thing you said is the idea that we can sort of outsource part of the more mundane, the simpler parts of our work, the more repetitive parts of our work, and we can focus on the more architectural, creative, innovative part.
Exactly.
Future.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining this interview today. I hope that the Vector Institute will have a wonderful time in the coming months with all the exciting projects you guys are working at. I know you're doing great with your team there, and be happy to catch up soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and good luck with everything.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You do. Thanks.